All right, y'all. Welcome back to the show, Anti-War Radio, on the Liberty Radio Network. We are anti-war here against all 5 of America's wars. And I know you're saying 5, but yeah, stop and count them. Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. We oppose the war in Somalia here, too. WikiLeaks reveal U.S. twisted Ethiopia's arm to invade Somalia. Reads the headline at Foreign Policy in Focus's blog, fpif.org/blog. And joining us on the phone is this article's author, Rob Prince. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I sure appreciate you joining us here. And in fact, I'm sorry, let me page down and mention here, Rob Prince is the publisher of the Colorado Progressive Jewish News. So thank you very much for joining us again. It's a very important story. I used to say all the time, because I thought it was pretty apparent that it was, America's war and Ethiopia was a proxy army invading Somalia for us. And then I was discouraged to that notion, actually, by a woman that I still have a lot of respect for over at the Human Rights Watch, who has had a lot of expertise in Somalia. And I'm so sorry her name is escaping me at the moment. But now it looks like I was right after all, and not only did the CIA and the Special Forces help with the invasion that was going to happen anyway, according to some information in the new WikiLeaks, seems like it's now, a proven fact that the Americans, the Bush administration, basically hired or in some way arranged for the Ethiopian army to invade Somalia Christmas 2006. Is that right?
Well, that's basically accurate. First, for starters, there were a number of reports at the time of the invasion that the Ethiopian military force was directed by U.S. Special Forces as they went into the country, and that was reported in the American media. So I don't know that this particular leak that came out in WikiLeaks is what I would consider that new, but what it does is it substantiates, if you like, greatly substantiates what those news reports were saying at the time, and what apparently Scott, you suspected at the time, and that was that the United States was intimately involved in every step of that invasion.
Mm-hmm. It was Leslie Lefkow is who I was thinking of from Human Rights Watch, and I guess what she said was she thought the Ethiopians had their own purposes in invading, their own worries, and they kind of wanted to do it, and so the U.S. said, okay, well, we'll help. But this is actually portraying quite a different story.
Well, not to justify Leslie's position, but part of the problem here is so much of what the Special Forces does, not only in Ethiopia, but in the other 4 wars, not only in Somalia, but in the other 4 wars you referred to, and who knows where else, is considered secret, not open. So it's harder to document, and it's also true that there have been problems along the Ethiopian-Somali borders, and there's Somali population in Ethiopia that the Ethiopians have been uncomfortable about. But the fact of the matter remains that in 2006, the Ethiopian government had many other concerns that it had to deal with, and the president of the country, who was really running into a lot of trouble. And the last thing that he wanted to do, it appears, was to launch this attack on Somalia. His human rights record was seriously deteriorating. The country was in the midst of an overall crisis, economic and social. The level of repression in the country had reached in Ethiopia really something approaching really almost obscene levels, and hardly reported. And therefore, his base within the country was quite narrow, and he was very nervous about this invasion. And it was at that point, and this is what, if you like, is new about the revelations, that then the then U.S. Undersecretary of State for Africa, Frazer, Jendayi Frazer, who had always a very long and close relationship with Condi Rice, professional relationship, went to Ethiopia and really twisted the president's arm and pressed him rather hard to invade. At the time, the war in Iraq was going really badly for the U.S. Afghanistan was already a mess, and the notion of a large-scale U.S. military invasion in Somalia was out of the question. You also have the Black Hawk Down incident, which happened in the Clinton years. So the U.S. was nervous about getting involved there too heavily, and so therefore they, what it now seems to be pretty crystal clear, prodded Ethiopia to take the ball and to invade, and in exchange for military aid and the usual nonsense, if you like. At the same time that Undersecretary of State Frazer was pressuring Ethiopia to invade, she was making public statements to cover her butt. And the statements basically was the United States doesn't support an Ethiopian invasion of Somaliland. Once again, you kind of see what this WikiLeaks exposure has shown. A two-track policy, one of creating fabrications for the public. On the one hand, there's another word for that, it's just outright lying, while following a more serious and nefarious track in an underhanded fashion. So this is what Frazer did. No, the United States opposes military action at the same time that she's pushing Ethiopia to do it. Now, this invasion did not go well for Ethiopia. The idea was because Somalia was so fragmented at the time that it would be easy. But as often happens, the invasion brought together the diverse trends within the country against the outside invader, and the Ethiopian military took a beating. They took a beating. Well, and they had to withdraw, although that didn't happen until last year. And they really withdrew with their tail between their legs. So as the situation deteriorated, and of course within Somalia, they committed all kinds of war crimes, which very little has been investigated about. So this is pretty serious stuff. While this is going on and the situation in Somalia is deteriorating, it's at that time that Frazer blames the invasion on Ethiopia, that the United States had nothing to do with it. So it's pretty slimy stuff that was going on there. And I just want to add one point here, is that before this, for a certain amount of time, Frazer was the U.S. ambassador to South Africa. Early in the Bush years, that was her first assignment. And at that time, she was trying to put together what was called a coalition of the willing, which has a certain familiar ring to it, to get the different U.S. allies in the southern part of Africa to invade Zimbabwe and to unseat Mugabe, a kind of South African version of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Her pressure on those countries was so strong and serious, if you like, that she lost that post. The South Africans asked
all right, we'll pick it up right after this break.
All righty.
It's Rob Prince from Foreign Policy in Focus. We'll be right back. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm looking at fpif.org/blog, Foreign Policy in Focus, their website, fpif.org/blog. The article is called WikiLeaks Revealed U.S. Twisted Ethiopia's Arm to Invade Somalia. That's referring to the invasion of Christmas 2006. It's by Rob Prince, and again, he is the publisher of Colorado Progressive Jewish News. And now, so here's the thing. You talk about, one of the things you mentioned there was that the Ethiopian invasion, rather than fracturing the different factions in Somalia from each other, united them. And so I was hoping maybe we could rewind a little bit to earlier in 2006, because it seemed like they were all fractured until America started covertly supporting the warlords, including the son of Adid, the bad guy from the Black Hawk Down incident, the evil warlord they were up against in that. It's his son and his buddies, and it was American support for them that helped solidify support for the Islamic Courts Union, made them strong enough to be able to kick those warlords out of the country into Ethiopia in the first place. And then that was the emergency that Condi Rice had to solve. Isn't that about right?
That's correct. And
so that's how the Islamic Courts Union got their monopoly on power in Somalia finally, was the reaction to American intervention before this war even started.
Well, in part, the other thing about the Islamic courts, you have a situation where the country had literally collapsed a couple of years before, and not unlike, at least in a certain sense, Afghanistan and the Taliban. What is it that the Islamic courts brought to a country in collapse? All right. Well, they might not have brought democracy, but they brought a certain kind of order. And in contrast with some of these other Islamic groups, I would argue that the Islamic courts, in many ways, are somewhat more moderate. They really weren't. They're not really an Al Qaeda type operation. But the U.S. It reminds me of during the Cold War, wherever the United States saw opposition, they said it was communist. So now we have, wherever you see the rise of some kind of Islamic group, all they can see is Taliban or Al Qaeda, and it suggests that something else about U.S. foreign policy, that for the last 60 or 70 years, the country, we don't have a clue about what's going on in a lot of these countries, how to deal with the problems in these countries. What our role has been, certainly in the last 10 years, only exacerbating tensions that might have existed in some level, and that continues. And Somalia is a classic example, whether we're talking about in the Cold War period, the post-war Cold War period, of what I would call a U.S. foreign policy out of control, without a clue, and when all else fails and everything else fails because they don't have a clue, they use more and more to play the military card. And whether it's through outright invasion, the way it's been in Iraq or Afghanistan, or all this what I would refer to simply as special forces nonsense, or prodding in the case of Frazer and getting the Ethiopians to do it. It's a foreign policy that's going nowhere.
Well, that's such an important point. I want to chew over that for a second because, it's hard a lot of times. It's hard for me to see ultimate power acting so blindly. I mean, I'm trying to remember here. It's Condi Rice we're talking about here, and she really is a dingbat. I can see that. But on the other hand, it's so much power being deployed that you'd think that there's got to be some kind of level of wisdom about it. But to be as ignorant, to base an invasion on the motive that you just described, that, look, they call themselves Islamic, they must be bad like the Taliban, let's use force against them. That's like the kind of wisdom you'd find at the blog at National Review or something. But the average reader of antiwar.com would know a lot better than that before sticking their nose in this, just from being the average reader of it, not the Secretary of State, for crying out loud. It seems to me like the other option is their stupidity is the plan. What better way to have a long war than just keep blundering around, creating enemies, creating blowback, and then, hell, you can read in the New York Daily News that, look, there's this terrible new terrorist group, Al-Shabaab, that apparently came from a void and of some description, but nobody knows what that void might have been or what could have caused it, and now they're this terrible new terrorist group we have to deal with. Maybe we need a giant military base in Somalia somewhere to stop this. And on we go.
Right, and on we go. Concerning, just a couple points here, concerning Condi Rice. Condi Rice got her degree and has a long association with the University of Denver's Korbel School of International Studies, where I teach. Without going through her full history and the turns and what seems to be the turns in her politics, one can say this: Condi Rice's academic experience had to do with Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and her knowledge of
even then she doesn't even speak Russian, right? I mean, come on.
Well, this is true. But whatever, her knowledge was in that area. Her knowledge of the Middle East and even African politics was nothing extraordinary. Now, I say this because, in spite of this, I would say that compared to some of the others who were in the Bush administration, one could say she had certain academic preparation. But still, someone who's a classic American diplomat, hardly speaks any foreign languages, has an area of concentration in one part of the world, but is dealing with stuff in another part of the world where she really doesn't have that much knowledge or clue. All right, the second point is this: what is a U.S. ambassador today? Whether it's for the most part, it's someone who made a big campaign contribution to get a president elected. It's some bimbo businessman whose reward to keep him out of the administration, for the most part, whatever administration, is to send him halfway around the world to some place he doesn't know anything about. And finally, you have a country that's foreign policy, I can't emphasize it enough, is out of control. And they really, there's a strategy there, if you like, mostly defined by the neocons, a global strategy, but almost with no rhyme or reason or no sense to it in today's world. And it's so unfortunate to see our current president, for the most part, having bought into this strategy and perpetuating it to a very great degree.
Oh, yeah, well, Hillary Clinton goes out there and threatens to bomb Eritrea if they keep financing the resistance in Somalia. We'll just do more of the same here.
Yes.
And I can't help but note that, but see, here's the thing. It's the pointy part of East Africa there, right? It's the gate to the Red Sea, and it seems like if I was a Navy man, maybe I'd want some bases there and an excuse to have some bases there or something like that. But then again, access to the Red Sea isn't threatened. So, I mean, it seems like it'd be cheaper. Maybe that's the key. It'd be more expensive to have bases there than not. Is that where this is going?
Well, we already have a base there.
Yeah, well, in Djibouti, I know we do. In Somalia, do we yet?
No, we don't have a base, and the military aspect of U.S. foreign policy is looking for, quote, a home in Africa, if you like.
Right.
And
they created a whole new AFRICOM to do it with.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is that at least to date, there's no African country that's willing to provide the home. And it appears that the headquarters of AFRICOM is going to be in D.C., which is something of a humiliation. But there's something you should watch here, and it's the following. And it has to do with Afghanistan. Afghanistan is really, for the United States, a test case for NATO, making NATO into something of an international U.S.-led police force. It's not clear from where I'm sitting, and I agree. I'm in my Rocky Mountain High here in Denver in the mountains, and it distorts things. But what it looks like is that it hasn't been decided yet what's going to be the main arm of U.S. military policy in Africa. Will it be NATO? And if Afghanistan is either a military victory or not even that, if the U.S. can claim that it is, right, then I think what we're going to see is the significant extension of NATO operations in Africa. If as it looks, the Afghanistan military venture is going to be wind up being a fiasco, then AFRICOM. Then AFRICOM looks like that will be the solution. So they've got, if you like, these two scenarios that they're playing with. And ultimately, when we're talking about Africa, you're right to speak about the Red Sea and its strategic importance, but ultimately what we're really looking at is the great chase for minerals and energy resources, and who's going to control that. And, the U.S. attempt to be in charge of that, and that's unfortunately what is driving U.S. policy throughout the continent.
Well, I guess it's nice to hear finally that there's a silver lining to the war in Afghanistan and the way it's going. I've been searching in vain for one, and I appreciate that.
Well, I mean,
because if it's the test case, then we've seen what happened in Marja. We've seen what's going on in Kandahar. The headlines today are Taliban small arms attacks nearly double over last year. The counterinsurgency strategy is a failure. General Petraeus is the worst loser ever to be a general in America, and it's decided. It's right here in USA Today. He's failed.
Yes. Well, again, looking at it from here, it looks like things are going very, very poorly, and that it's going to be more difficult for Petraeus to claim victory in Afghanistan the way he did with the surge in Iraq, even though, it's questionable whether he accomplished anything. And so they're really in trouble in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, it's brought down a number of empires. So, but then there's the arrogance of power. So
right.
Look.
Well, if I can keep you another couple minutes, I'd like to ask you a couple more questions about Somalia and the way things stand there now. Because, I mentioned sarcastically Al-Shabaab there is this brand new group that came out of nothing, but I mean, the real story there is that the Islamic Courts Union, the reason that they were so moderate is because they were old men. And now, like you said, the invasion rallied all different factions throughout the country together against the Ethiopian and now the African Union invading and occupation force. And there, you have a whole new generation of, fighting age males, as they call them, with rifles. And now the best I understand it, please correct me if I go off the story, however you can, but as I understand it, now the Islamic Courts Union is basically the government, and that Condoleezza Rice, not Obama, but Bush and Rice, basically conceded defeat to the Islamic Courts Union after tens of thousands of people have been killed and millions run out of their homes and on the brink of starvation all over the country, as Leslie Lefkow explained on the show. But basically they said, okay, look, you guys can be the government, but you got to be within the shell of our little transitional federal government that we created with the UN and whatever. But then we'll let you be the government. Now Al-Shabaab are the rebels against them for now siding with us and making a deal with our guys. Is that about right?
That's about right. It's not about right. It's quite accurate. I would, by way of comparison, I mean, basically what we're seeing is another, as I said earlier, almost a complete lack of understanding of how to bring this country, in this case Somalia, back to some kind of healthy situation. And the United States is not going to be able to do it. If you contrast or compare what U.S. policy in Somalia with its policy just across the Red Sea, in one of those other wars you were talking about, Yemen, you'll see a very, very similar situation. And the situation is, number one, not understanding, or for that matter, even caring about what really are the main problems of the country, exaggerating the fundamentalist, quote, threat, or in this case the Al-Qaeda threat, both to Yemen and to the region. Al-Qaeda is very small in Yemen by all objective reports. And what has the U.S. now it's completely public, military intervention done there? It's only strengthened the hand of Al-Qaeda, completely discredited the government in Sana'a for its connection to the U.S. military, there's some other aspects, the whole Saudi connection to the whole thing. But once again, what we see is, as I call it, a foreign policy out of control, the blind leading the blind with drones. And that's U.S. foreign policy today.
Wow, add me to your email list, Scott@antiwar.com. This is good stuff, and I like foreign policy in focus, but I think this is the first time I've read your work. Certainly, the first time I've talked to you on the show. But this
is published me.
Say what?
But I'm going to be writing. It's the first time I've been published there, but I guess I'll be writing regularly for them.
Great.
And
in fact, as we speak, I'm submitting this to the antiwar.com viewpoint database here.
All right, cool. That's very cool.
Hopefully, we'll run this on the front page tomorrow.
And I'm going to be what I'm going to be writing about. I'm going to be writing about the Horn of Africa, Yemen, and then for my own personal history, I'm going to be writing about North Africa, Tunisia, and Algeria. And, of course, a little bit about the Israeli-Palestinian stuff, but so many people are writing about that I figure I don't have anything to say that others haven't said, better or more. But I'll be writing.
Great.
Writing.
I look forward to reading it. I look forward to talking with you again. This has been a great time.
Scott,
appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, everybody. That is Rob Prince, and his piece is at Foreign Policy in Focus. That's FPIF.org. This piece is called WikiLeaks Reveals U.S. Twisted Ethiopia's Arm to Invade Somalia. This article published December 8th, 2010. And Rob Prince is also the publisher of the Colorado Progressive Jewish News.